So a few episodes back, you mentioned a quote by Asimov, and I had some time to think a bit further about it and wanted to use it to launch into a discussion that we kind of teased in another previous episode about education. So the quote was, "There is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there has always been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge." So when that quote was mentioned, I made the comment that you could substitute a number of different things there. But what it really kind of struck me, as we've talked about a number of other topics surrounding people and their choices and things of that nature, is trying to figure out and understand what I would pinpoint as the problem, and then just talking about how we might even try to tackle it or address it. And it led me back to a couple of things that I've long held to be frustrating in the United States. And that is, we have an educational system that doesn't try to do more than what the core definition of an education is. And by that I mean that it doesn't try to instill the ability to analyze things or to critically think through information presented. It focuses on what can be tested via standardized tests.
Like No Child Left Behind.
Right. And, of course, in the current climate of arguments about things like critical race theory and banning books because they don't have books that offer alternative viewpoints, I assume you're familiar with what that's semi-referencing. Or do I need to explain a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead, because I don't know what you're referencing.
So I believe it was Texas predominantly that caught the headlines, but there are efforts to ban books about the Holocaust because books about the other viewpoints aren't present or something to that effect. And it's not just the Holocaust. There were other books referenced, but that one kind of really illustrates the linchpin idea. You want to stop providing information about the persecution of people because you don't have information about what those who are persecuting others thought. Like that doesn't make much sense to me. But it very much encapsulates a number of problems with education.
If we're gonna ban books, like I initially thought like banning books is bad, but not if they're books of misinformation. We want to ban misinformation.
And so the whole point of what I read was basically they don't want the facts of the Holocaust taught because there are no alternative provisions for understanding the facts of the other side.
Well, I mean, you can kind of go to the other side and see what they've done.
Well, before we go into semantics, it prompted a question just to clarify first that I know what my definition and opinion of what it means to receive an education is. I don't know that I've ever asked you yours. And so I thought we would start with just what does it mean to receive an education? And the reason I wanted to start with that is because it influences things like should certain topics be banned or whitewashed or trivialized or, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, depending on what you think an education should provide.
So I don't think I've ever thought about what an education is, and I feel like there's kind of we probably have all the same basic level idea of of going to class and learning from someone who would be considered a subject matter expert on a particular course or subcategory of a course, so that you can understand and in certain cases repeat or show work related to that topic. Sometimes, like with mathematics and science, being able to demonstrate a certain understanding of solving problems or explaining concepts, explaining the significance of a historical event, and so forth.
So this is part of why I copied in the Merriam-Webster definition of education, because it also differs from what my definition would have been as well. And before I give the Webster definition, my thought of what it means to receive an education is to, or prior to doing a little bit of reading, was the thought that you were enhancing knowledge about the world at large in order to better understand how to navigate said world, with the goal of being a better person, obviously through expansion of knowledge. I think I attributed too much thought to that one item about the goal of being a better person than what the definitions would indicate education officially is defined as. And so the Webster definition basically means if you attend a school, college, or university and receive structured teaching, you receive an education, in a nutshell.
It's surprising to me how many times when I have fallen back to the dictionary definition of a word, but like, oh man, that falls flat on its face for me.
Yeah, same here. And so it led me down a path of understanding the difference between, or trying to wrap my head around what I actually thought an education should be versus what it is officially defined as. And so to me, an education should be guided learning in a structured way that helps you understand and interact with the world around you. To me, that's the goal of an education. There is some truth to that from the definition, because if you think about the purpose of a common education among a society, it gives a shared foundation from which to interact and understand others, or at least in premise. The big problem that I have is that I came to the realization that education alone is a failure. So education absent learning is a failure. But at the same time, the definition of learning is the acquisition of knowledge through experience or an intrinsic desire to know more, whether right or wrong. And so therefore learning without education is also a failure, because you could learn incorrectly.
Right.
So where I'm kind of going with this in general is I feel like education is in a state that does not attempt to promote learning in the United States. Maybe in some individual classrooms based on the teacher, but as a whole, the institution is not geared toward promoting learning. It's geared toward memorization and achieving a certain quantifiable number on exams. That does break down a little bit when you get into quote-unquote higher education, depending on the quality of said higher education. But I know plenty of higher education classes that fit that category too. And so thinking about, or having looked through a lot of this, it led me back to the quote by Asimov. And because part of what sparked my interest in figuring out this entire topic is, why is there such a pervasive culture of anti-intellectualism today?
Something that I like that really stuck out to me this time when you read the quote at the beginning of the show was that the anti-intellectualism has always been there. And I hadn't really thought about that. I feel like there's been a rise of anti-intellectualism in the past 20 years, and that's been really problematic. But in that quote from Asimov is about 40 years old, so around 1980, and the whole thing was, it's like, in the quote, it's like, it's always been here. And I'm like, I hadn't really paid a lot of attention to that part of the quote. And so I'm like, has America had a certain selection of people that just weren't fit for Europe? Or the selection of people that came to the Americas, those that were not fit for Europe. Is that what has happened? And is that why we have these issues? But at the same time, didn't we once have like one of the best education systems in the world?
We might have. I didn't go back and look at any type of comparisons. But you did hit on something that I was thinking through. It's more a matter of it being more prominent now, or more visible, which is understandable given technology in general.
Yeah.
But if just thinking back through the history of human understanding, every advance in science has always been met with skepticism anyway. I mean, you still have people who claim the earth is flat to this day. There's a certain level of not understanding abstract concepts that is a learned skill. And if it's never structured in a way to at least understand that concept, I think it's something that a lot of people just aren't capable of latching onto without that guidance. And so one of the things that I thought of was that, how have we historically measured the quality of educational systems anyway? Like, going beyond just what we know of the, I'll call it reformed American approach, since No Child Left Behind. But even prior to that, what was really the measure for how well the educational system worked? And I don't have an answer for it. I didn't research it. But it's an interesting thought, because I don't think we've ever adequately measured it. I think we just have accepted some level of individual performance post-education in a abstract manner, like general quality of skilled labor entering the workforce, or capable data scientists in today's terms, or, you pick what it is, but something that's tied to the capability of the emerging graduates from school entering the workforce and succeeding. That seems to be the general measurement we've used for a long time. That's crap. I mean, that's not even remotely close to measuring the ability of a person to understand and navigate anything. That's the ability of a person to perform the functions they are told to perform.
It might be a good measure if we were looking at trades, like a skill.
But then those particular schools specialize in those trades, or you had apprenticeships where you learned under the guidance of someone who was skilled in that trade.
So, I mean, we put that under the umbrella of education.
We do. And that, to me, those types of environments are more correctly defined as education than the K through 12 system in the U.S. Like, I go back to thinking through my education. And I very distinctly remember in, K through 12, I'll omit the college levels for now. But in K through 12, I remember 3 classes, specifically because of the teachers, where I felt like I actually learned something. I didn't just have to do busy work or memorization. Those 3 classes all focused on being able to analyze something that you were given and provide support for your analysis. Why is that not a consistently approached skill set just across the board? Like, that has served me so much better than learning trig or calculus at this point. Not to diss on math, because I understand it's important. It's just, for me, those critical thinking skills have been vital.
Well, I think that, like, most people don't get to a level of math where critical thinking skills can be applied. Like, a lot of it is just, like, formulaic. I think when you get into the levels of math that require critical thinking, it's pretty advanced and does not serve the purpose that most people would need math skills for. That being said, there's like a number of things where I guess you do have to learn and memorize. I don't know what I was thinking. Like, I was thinking something and I kind of lost the thought, but.
Well, there are certainly a number of things that should be taught and learned from the standpoint of education serving to provide a level of socialization.
Right. Or just like collecting a base level of knowledge about a particular thing. You can't be expected to think well, maybe you can. Maybe you can be expected at an early age. But does every person possess that skill or desire to do those things?
Well, I don't think so. I think that's why it should be guided learning over the course of years of instruction. I mean, there are some people who certainly are capable of grasping those types of skills quicker than others, just as there are some who are much quicker at seeing and repeating information, or like, everybody has their strengths and weaknesses.
Yes.
The big thing that I kind of came back to, after I started thinking about what's it mean to receive an education, and it didn't really line up with my initial thoughts, well, then I took it a step further and thought, well, okay, what does it mean to be educated? We place a lot of emphasis on that in surveys and polls and things of that nature. But what does it actually mean to be educated? Does it mean you can apply some level of analysis to a problem, or you're capable of remembering all 50 states and their capitals? What is the baseline for determining what it means to be educated?
Well, I guess, I'm not trying to steal this from you, but how do you differentiate between education and quote unquote brainwashing?
Well, that's the rub, right? Because if you take it further to the current climate, and you have people who are opposed to explaining in more detail and teaching in more detail about a number of different topics, such as the entirety of the Civil War, you're not doing anything but providing a specific narrative that you want to provide because it suits a purpose, not because it teaches the actual historical fact.
Well, I think we have a word. I think we have a word for that, and that's propaganda, right?
Propaganda is certainly fitting. Brainwashing is certainly fitting.
Yeah.
Um, it's one of those things that as a Southern native, it was difficult to grasp how inaccurate textbooks were in teaching the history of the states.
No, I certainly remember my education regarding that.
Like it was harped on
Mm-hmm.
so heavily that it was all about states' rights.
Yes. States' rights to do what, though?
Yeah, see, that's the
Own
problem.
slaves.
They never wanted to go the extra step to explain what that meant. They wanted to stop short of it because it looked better.
Well, it's purposely deceptive.
Yes. And so in many scenarios, it is brainwashing. At the very least, if you don't want to go the route of calling it brainwashing, because I get how negative that is, it is very much a crafted narrative designed to make you feel better about history.
I remember hearing it called the War of Northern Aggression.
I've heard that as well.
So, yeah.
And so kind of what all of that fed back into was that it becomes less surprising that something like the January 6th attack on the Capitol could come to fruition. Because you have a proliferation of educated individuals who never learned anything. They received the information they received in school from people who were supposed to be there to provide that information, from textbooks that supposedly were accurate and detailed. And what they hear from others doesn't match the reality of what they've known for years. It's no surprise that they latch on to those bubbles of reaffirmation or gravitate toward that information that supports what they've known. And so you have truly an education problem.
Yes, definitely so.
But how do you fix it? Because if anti-intellectualism has been pervasive for a long time, it's not going to go away anytime soon. And with everything surrounding COVID and Trump, we've seen anti-intellectualism run rampant.
It's certainly gotten worse.
Well, it feels like it's gotten worse. I don't know that we could say it definitively has. I think we can say that we definitively see it more often than we used to, but that doesn't necessarily equate to a higher rate of occurrence.
I agree. I would not expect that there's a higher rate of occurrence, but I say that it's gotten worse in that we did see an insurrection happen. We have seen people fight what we actually know to be just good sense in protecting one another. Like, people have actively fought it for no good reason, other than they don't like being told, or they somehow equate being told what to do is that you're better than me.
I agree with that, but I feel like it misses the mark as well. I feel like it's more overt than that, actually. I think it's more focused on, if you're telling me what to do, you are trying to take away my right to choose. But we've already established there's no innate right to choose. You can listen to last week for that one. But how often have you heard that it's my right to have a choice? And that stems from a lack of proper education. Because we don't teach what freedoms exist and don't exist, and what it actually means to exercise said freedoms. We don't teach what rights you actually have or don't have. We gloss over it. We teach that there's a Constitution and a Bill of Rights, and the courts decide a bunch of other stuff. We don't have guided learning about what it means to operate as a functioning member of society. We expect, if everyone has the same education, it will result in the same general approach to navigating society. But that's a logical fallacy.
Yeah. And, I just, and it perpetuates itself because there's so many educators that are also anti-intellectual.
Right. I think it's a multiple factors compounded. You have a number of educators who are skeptical of many things, but for whatever reason feel that their subject is beyond reproach, perhaps.
Well, I think that no, there's a large number of educators that are a part of the problem. Like, they are not the cause of the problem; they are part of the problem.
That I would agree with.
I think that there is a purposeful, there's an effort at a higher level. It's partially political, or highly political, I think. Maybe not just partially, but highly political, to keep things the way they are. Because when you have a proper education, you start to see the corruption. And when you start to see the corruption, you are educated, you know how to combat the corruption. So
I'm going to disagree on a couple of points there, but it's only because I'm going to go back to the base definition of education. If you have an education, you're not necessarily if you have a proper education, according to the definition, that doesn't necessarily lend itself to being able to identify the corruption. If you have an education that also promotes learning, that's when you start to be able to understand these other concepts. And I know that's what you meant by proper education, but I wanted to call out the phrasing.
Yeah, I agree. Because we talk about learning, learning is taking existing information and being able to go into new territory with basic critical thinking skills, analytical skills, and forging into new territory with the tools you've been given and the sort of domain knowledge that you currently have. Does that sound?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And that would make you an intellectual.
Yes.
Whereas you can have an education, but not stick to maybe dogma that is not. Not all dogma is bad, but some of it is. Or we use the term, dogma, I guess, to represent the domain knowledge that might be misinformation or incorrect or deceptive, and that would make you an anti-intellectual.
Would it be fair to even simplify it more, just for those who maybe don't follow the train of thought, that being an anti-intellectual means that you don't accept that which has been substantially proven to be correct? It's more simplistic, but it more or less captures the point. Or does it miss some of the nuance of?
I think in the term, if you say intellectual is one who has some domain knowledge, but also has the ability to think critically, analyze, and explore maybe it's specifically new to them, but it might be old news to somebody else who's been there and done that, and that's one thing. And then the anti-intellectual is the one who does not do that. Not necessarily working against, but just the lack of doing those things, the lack of thinking critically or analyzing and so forth.
So I'm reminded of a short little parable. It's one person representing the bodies of science in general. Looking over a fence at a sprinkler, sprinkling onto a yard or lawn, and another person looking through a hole in the fence, seeing what they ascribe to be rain, and arguing that it is raining, I can see it, even though science, as depicted by the other, could clearly illustrate why it was not actually raining. It was indeed something else. Using that imagery, I think it's maybe more correct to say that an anti-intellectual relies more on their perception of events, not necessarily out of malice or skepticism, but because they can't understand the greater abstract concept being presented. That seemed like it's maybe a fair definition.
Yeah, I think so.
So within the scope of that, it's difficult to argue an individual's perception of a situation when what they perceive does seem to be the situation, right? How can we shift thinking to be more accepting of those abstract concepts that we can't necessarily directly see ourselves? And I certainly don't have an answer for it, but I think that's the key point, that as long as people will question science because of what they can see, we're never going to get beyond this pervasive culture of anti-intellectualism without a substantive change in education.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like anti-intellectualism probably exists more than in the United States, but, this is, as with most Americans, we're very focused on ourselves and so forth. But I don't think this might be egregious here, but I don't think it is unique. I think it is a plight of the human condition.
Yeah, I think
certainly.
Go ahead.
I think there are certainly things that can be done to mitigate that, and I think some places have been more successful than others. If you were to use the United States as a bar of comparison, I think we're not alone with the issues that we have. I think that we maybe are more brash, or we're certainly on stage more.
Well, we're certainly, as a general rule, we tend to be more vocal in our thoughts. And I would imagine a lot of that has to do with the freedom of being able to be vocal with our thoughts.
There's that, but also we have a bunch of money. And with that comes the ability to heavily influence and be paid attention. Like, we influence things, but we're also being paid attention to because we influence things. Does that? I feel like we're getting like, I can follow how I got here, but we're getting away from the topic.
Well, sort of. I don't necessarily think we're getting away from it. I think we're very well illustrating that there's not a good answer for, one, what it actually means to figure out this problem, because there are so many different dynamics at play. And two, I mean, and obviously we're not necessarily the most qualified to try to tackle the problem, and have no reason to anyway, but to not even really have a good handle on what it means to tackle the problem, I think also perfectly illustrates how difficult a problem it is to address.
Yeah. I think a lot of it has been, what I was just describing, this is why it seems like that this is like I don't want to say acutely American problem, but it is an obvious problem in the United States. I don't, like I said, I think it exists in other places, but we're being very vocal about it, or Americans are being very vocal about it to other Americans. And the nature of communication is that the whole world can look at us and do the same thing. And maybe we have a higher, maybe we do have a higher incidence of anti-intellectuals in this country than other countries. Maybe not. Maybe some people just know how to keep their mouth shut, or it's just not important to them to feign the oppression of freedoms being stripped away by having to do, reasonably being asked to get a vaccine or wear a mask in a place. So there's that. Then there's also, we have been appeasing anti-intellectuals for as long as I can remember. Nobody is saying, "Oh, you want to put that in the school books? That doesn't belong there." Well, I believe it belongs there, so it should go there. The case that comes to mind from about 20 years ago is the introduction of the teaching of intelligent design as a theory in science. That doesn't belong there. Why is that acceptable? Well,
it goes hand in hand with the misguided argument that the theory of evolution in any way, shape, fashion, or form cannot coexist with other theories.
Right.
People like to say that either you believe in the concept of creation, divine creation, or you believe in the concept of evolution, but that's taking an argument that is not binary and making it binary. The Darwin simply pointed out that given time, a species will evolve based on the pressures of the environment. Other things will act on a species to cause it to change in some way, shape, fashion, or form. It's nothing other than an observation of what happens in the real world. It doesn't mean that everything evolved from a single cell. Somewhere, in a lake of sludge and mud and everything else, and over millions of years, everything became what it is. That's not what the theory of evolution refers to. It's not what the principles of Darwinism and the theories of evolution refer to. It has been extrapolated to that, and it could very well be that. But that's not how the theory is written. It helps to also illustrate the fundamental problem that if something is presented that a group of people dislike, the more vocal group of people get their way.
Well, in this case, there were enough Texans that said, "Hey, we want intellectual design in our textbooks," and Texas has a huge school system that buys textbooks. That the textbooks are like, "Well, yep, we got to make some money, so if we can't leave money on the table, so we have to put this in there." So, as unfortunate as that is, that's the world we live in.
So I'm actually okay with the inclusion of the theory of intellectual design as a theory. It's if it's taught absent competing theories that there's a problem.
See, I don't even think it's I'm not sure how it's a theory. It's at best a hypothesis.
But how can you devise a test to test it? So I agree.
That's what I mean. It's
so
a hypothesis, not a theory.
Well, yes and no. Because the way I look at, and this may just be a difference in understanding the criteria as well. The way I look at it is, if you cannot actually directly test a hypothesis, as many things in behavior cannot be directly tested, you can construct a series of not tests but observations that are statistically correlated in a way where you can say the likelihood of these co-occurring in a given sample based on what we know from the other sciences is X percentage. And if you are confident, or there's a statistical threshold where X number of occurrences occur that is beyond what we see in the other sciences, then you're able to express it as a theory because it's unlikely for it to be, it's an outlier, right? It's outside the what is expected based on what we understand. So I can understand that it's, in true scientific terms, it's a hypothesis and nothing better, because you can't fabricate a test around it. But a lot of things in the behavioral sciences are not directly testable either for ethical or moral considerations. And so you devise studies that take that into account and extrapolate what we know from occurrences of other things in other sciences to try to map to what you could reasonably expect. It's not perfect and it's not truly science, quote unquote, but it's the best we can do without causing irreparable harm to the subjects of study.
So,
that's the only reason I'm okay with it being called a theory. I'm just clarifying my thought process. Like, in general, I do agree if you can't devise a test, it's just a hypothesis.
Right. So where do you? So if you put it into the biology class, because I think that's where they're putting it, then you can't call it a theory at all. It's a hypothesis, and it really won't ever get out of the hypothesis box because there's nothing testable there. There's nothing observable.
That I would agree, because you're teaching it in what's generally classified as a physical science.
Yes. Whereas behavioral science has been put in its own class of things because our tools are simply so rudimentary that we can't put it in the physical sciences. I think one day behavioral sciences will be a part of the physical sciences. I just don't think we're advanced enough to be there yet. And that's why we have given it its own little section.
I think that's part of it. I think we're moving faster into, this is a side tangent, but I think we're moving faster into the understanding of behavior, not trying to be its own thing, but trying to be an understanding of the interplay of multiple things under the hood. And the reason I say that is one of the best classes I ever took was biosocial criminology. And it's a relatively new field of study that recognizes that sociology alone can't answer the questions, psychology alone can't answer the questions, biology alone, neurology alone, etc. And so the concept or the idea was, it doesn't matter what discipline it comes from. If it can explain something, we need to bring it in and examine it further and try to correlate with what we can from other disciplines as well. And I think we're on the path to recognizing there's not truly a divide between physical sciences and non-physical sciences. It's all science. It's just being able to actually map proper correlations. And once we have that understanding, it doesn't matter whether it was a test in a lab or an observation of people in a room. You can once
Right,
you
but
have that key, all of it kind of falls into place.
yeah, but like the hypothesis of intelligent design isn't observable. Like behavioral science is observable.
The hypothesis of intelligent design isn't observable yet. We can't say it's not observable.
Okay, but as it currently is, it's not observable yet, so it doesn't belong in any science, unless you say there's there's a group of people that have this hypothesis.
Well, I think that's where you draw the line. You have the hypothesis. You have to find a way to be able to formulate a way to test said hypothesis.
Right, and until that can be done, until you can, test it or observe it, it remains a hypothesis, not a theory, and doesn't really belong in science, in as much as the hypothesis that aliens came to Earth and, created us in their image and engineered us in a way to create beings. Like that's a hypothesis, but we don't see those in the textbooks.
No, but there's a place that both of those belong, and it's just not taught in such a way to take into account modern ideas. Philosophy.
Yeah.
I mean, philosophy has given root to, was the root to a number of sciences. That's where abstract concepts that aren't testable begin. I mean, Descartes, perfect example. I think, therefore I am. It's not accurate.
No, it's not.
But it gave root to exploration of understanding a number of things that have led to the sciences as we know them.
Yeah, well.
But in order to understand that, like the idea of abstract concepts taught via texts from ancient times to whatever happens to be the writing of the day, you have to teach it.
Yeah. So the problem is like intelligent design is put in the textbooks and it's not being passed off as what it is. It is being it's a charade of something else. It's there to be the antithesis of evolution, the theory of evolution.
Which is, again, they're not binary opposites.
But that's how it's being presented.
Right. No, I agree. The presence of intelligent design is there to placate the religious fanatics who refuse to acknowledge that evolution can exist, whether you are religious or not.
Right. And, but at the same time, you have scientists that are the top minds and experts in their particular field that are devout religious individuals. Many of them find a way to separate their science and their beliefs, their personal beliefs. And so when you have the ability to put in the hypothesis of intelligent design and somehow raise it above any other hypothesis, and then masquerade as a theory that is in direct competition to the well-accepted theory of evolution, indicates like a huge breakdown in what we call our education system. And it's only there to placate religious fundamentalists.
Because it's education without learning.
Yes. That's what we were talking about tonight, right?
It was. It is very much a presentation of desired common knowledge, absent the ability to critically think about what is being presented. It's education without learning.
We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.